What you're about to hear isn't the kind of routine back and forth that fades into the background of a long Senate hearing. This is one of those rare moments where a senator arrives with every question preloaded, every pause deliberate, and every pressure point already mapped. And the instant Senator John Kennedy begins speaking, you can feel it. He isn't there to gather information. He's there to test the system and expose it. Because when a hearing suddenly turns into a confrontation over surveillance authority, private phone records, 8 sitting U.S. senators under scrutiny, and a chilling reference to the Epstein network, the atmosphere changes. People lean forward. The room tightens. Kennedy opens with a hypothetical, but everyone in the room understands it's not really hypothetical. He asks the Justice Department witness to imagine being appointed special counsel. Then he narrows the focus. Telecommunications companies, phone records, AT&T, and finally the target, a sitting United States senator. Would a phone company just hand over those records? No. Would they demand a subpoena? Yes. Then Kennedy sharpens the blade. What must be shown to obtain those phone records of a sitting U.S. senator? Not good cause, probable cause, and not just any probable cause. The witness confirms that investigators would need to believe the senator was involved in a criminal conspiracy or activity that could lead to criminal charges. That alone lands heavily. Because Kennedy doesn't let it pass quietly, he repeats it. 8 sitting senators. 8. Now the questions aren't theoretical anymore. They're structural. What safeguards exist when that kind of power is used? Who signs off? A judge? And Kennedy points out that such a subpoena would likely go directly to the court. Then he pivots again, this time toward the private sector's role. Phone companies aren't passive. Their general counsels worry about civil liability. They have the right to challenge subpoenas. They can move to quash them? And a cautious attorney, Kennedy suggests, might even consider notifying the senator involved. Would that be allowed? The answer is careful. If investigators believe a crime has been committed, tipping off the subject would be improper. But the witness refuses to comment on any specific case. That refusal matters, because Kennedy isn't asking about one case, he's laying out a framework. A system where surveillance tools powerful enough to pierce the privacy of elected officials exist and where the justification for using them hinges on allegations that may never become public. The exchange isn't loud. No one raises their voice. But it's unsettling, because it forces a realization. If phone records of sitting senators were accessed, then somewhere along the line, a judge was convinced there was probable cause. And yet the public has been told almost nothing about how, or why. That's why this moment didn't disappear into the hearing transcript. It stuck. It raised questions about oversight, secrecy, and whether extraordinary investigative powers are being used with sufficient transparency or sufficient restraint. Kennedy never accuses. He doesn't need to. He lets the structure of the law do the talking. And by the time he's done, one thing is clear. This wasn't about hypotheticals. It was about how much the public doesn't know and how high the stakes really are when surveillance meets political power. And once that realization sets in, it's impossible to unhear it. Kennedy doesn't let go. He tightens the vice. He says, "I've never seen you commit a crime," then pivots immediately because this was never personal. It's procedural, structural, and dangerous if abused. He walks the witness through it again. Even if investigators didn't want to tip off a sitting United States senator, the phone companies themselves would recognize the gravity of what they were being asked to do. This wasn't routine compliance. This wasn't a parking ticket or a drug warrant. This was a request targeting a sitting U.S. senator. Any competent general counsel, Kennedy argues, would escalate that instantly. CEO, board, lawyers, a motion to quash. Because the legal exposure alone would be enormous. And the witness concedes the key point. Yes, the phone companies could have challenged the subpoenas. They didn't have to comply. They had the legal right to push back. Kennedy pounces on that admission. If a reasonable company should have challenged a subpoena of that magnitude and didn't, then liability follows. Civil liability, reputational damage, possibly worse. The witness tries to retreat into process. Phone companies usually comply with subpoenas from the federal government. Kennedy cuts him off. Usually isn't the standard here. This wasn't usual. This was extraordinary. And extraordinary power demands extraordinary justification. Then Kennedy delivers one of those lines that lands because it's absurd and true. Either the phone company somehow didn't recognize the names of 8 sitting U.S. senators, or they lacked the backbone to challenge something they knew was wrong. Either way, it's alarming. Then comes the turn that changes everything. Kennedy asks a simple question. Do you have copies of the subpoena applications? The answer isn't no. It's silence. I can't discuss that. Not even whether copies exist. That's the moment the hearing crosses a line from hypothetical to ominous. Kennedy presses again. When will you be able to discuss it? The response is even more revealing. The witness won't even confirm whether there is a pending investigation. Kennedy pauses. Then he lays out the consequences. This won't go quietly. Telecom companies won't let it. They face liability? FBI agents could face liability? A special counsel could face liability. And if this wasn't handled correctly, the blowback will come from every direction. Then Kennedy asks the question that goes to the heart of oversight. If a special counsel sought phone records of a sitting U.S. senator, is that something the Attorney General should be told? The answer, yes. Did Attorney General Garland know? The witness admits he only learned about this very recently. So did Director Patel, and they still can't discuss it. That admission lands hard, because it implies that one of the most sensitive surveillance actions imaginable may have occurred without clear, visible accountability at the top. Kennedy pushes further. Should the FBI director have been told? Again, the answer dodges. In general, the FBI would assist in executing subpoenas. That's not an answer. It's an evasion. And by the end of the exchange, the point is unmistakable. This wasn't about comedy. It wasn't about hypotheticals. It was about whether extraordinary surveillance powers were used against elected officials, and whether anyone in charge is willing or able to explain how, why, and under whose authority. No accusations were made, none were needed, because the silence said more than any answer could. Kennedy shifts gears and makes it clear he's done warming up. He says he wants to move on to another issue, especially since others were allowed to run over their time. And then he goes straight to it. He brings up an interview given by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on October 1st, an interview that raised eyebrows the moment it aired. In that interview, Lutnick described Jeffrey Epstein as, quote, the greatest blackmailer ever. Kennedy asks the Attorney General whether she has reviewed the transcript. She says she hasn't read the full transcript, but she did see the clip. Kennedy presses forward. He explains that Lutnick wasn't just a distant observer. According to reporting, Epstein lived next door to him. Their townhouses shared a wall. This wasn't a casual acquaintance. This was proximity. Kennedy reminds the room of what came next in that interview. The reporter asked how so many powerful men could have associated with Epstein when Lutnick claimed he could immediately tell something was wrong. The reporter asked whether others saw it and chose to ignore it. Lutnick's answer was blunt. According to him, they didn't ignore it. They participated. Kennedy then quotes the most explosive part of the interview. Lutnick said Epstein's method was simple. Invite people in under the guise of massages. What happened in those rooms, he suggested, was likely recorded. Epstein, Lutnick said, used those recordings to blackmail people. That, according to Lutnick, is how Epstein maintained his wealth and influence. Kennedy pauses and asks the most basic question. Is that true? The Attorney General responds carefully. She points to the Department of Justice's July memo, which states that investigators did not uncover evidence supporting those claims. She reminds the committee that the Epstein case has passed through multiple administrations and multiple U.S. attorneys. Kennedy cuts in. He says he understands that. But that wasn't his question. He asks whether the FBI or DOJ has ever interviewed Howard Lutnick about those statements. The answer is no. Kennedy asks the obvious follow-up. Do you plan to? The response is conditional. If Lutnick wants to speak to the FBI, or if the FBI wants to speak to him, that could happen. Kennedy doesn't hide his disbelief. After public comments like that, he suggests maybe the FBI should want to talk to him. Maybe Congress should hear from him directly. He even floats the idea of calling Lutnick before the committee. Before the moment can go further, the chair moves on to the next senator, but the tension doesn't disappear. It lingers, because by this point, everyone in the room understands what Kennedy has been doing all along. He's not chasing rumors. He's lining up statements made by powerful people and asking, why no one seems interested in following up DOP, and that brings the hearing full circle. Earlier, Kennedy walked the Attorney General through a so-called hypothetical about subpoenas, but no one believed it was hypothetical. He described a scenario where a special counsel walks into a telecom company and asks for phone records belonging to a sitting United States senator. He repeated the phrase again and again, sitting senator. To make sure the gravity of it landed, the Attorney General agreed with every step. No phone company would comply without a subpoena. Probable cause would be required. A judge would have to approve it, but Kennedy didn't stop there. He kept tightening the loop, because if phone records belonging to not one, but 8 sitting senators were turned over without resistance, without a motion to quash, without serious internal debate, then something is deeply wrong. Either the companies failed to act responsibly, or the justification presented to them was extraordinary. And in either case, Kennedy made one thing clear: that kind of power, used that casually, should terrify anyone who cares about the rule of law. As the tension thickens in the room, Kennedy leans forward and says what no one else is willing to say out loud. Maybe, he jokes, they should have gone online and ordered a backbone instead of instantly complying. It's classic Kennedy humor, sharp enough to draw laughs, but cutting enough to leave a mark. And Pam Bondi knows exactly what he's doing. She immediately pulls back into formal legal language. She says she can't talk about active investigations. She says she can't confirm specifics. She says she can't discuss the facts of this case. But in doing that, she doesn't calm the situation. She escalates it. Because to viewers watching at home, especially those who've seen decades of government power expand and contract, the stakes suddenly feel much higher. This isn't about technical paperwork anymore. It's about whether private communications belonging to elected officials were accessed. And it's about whether massive telecom corporations handed over that data without putting up any resistance. Kennedy zeroes in on that point. Telecom companies are not powerless. History shows they often push back. They challenge subpoenas. They demand judges step in. They force the government to justify why private data should be turned over. And they do that for a reason. Civil liability matters. Turning over sensitive information without proper legal grounding can lead to lawsuits, fines, and serious consequences. Kennedy knows that history. And he knows Bondi knows it too. So, when she avoids explaining why not a single telecom company fought these subpoenas, he refuses to move on. He wants the public to hear what isn't being said. Something about this situation doesn't add up, because if telecom lawyers didn't challenge those requests, didn't even attempt to block them, then one of two things must be true. Either they were convinced that 8 sitting U.S. senators were involved in criminal activity, or someone applied pressure that hasn't yet been fully disclosed. And if you're watching from home, you can feel how big that implication is. It spreads quietly like cracks beneath the surface, but what truly defines this exchange isn't Kennedy's words. It's Bondi's silence. Each time he tries to establish who knew what and when, she steps back. Did the special counsel inform the Attorney General? Was the FBI director briefed? Did the chain of command function the way it's supposed to? She doesn't confirm. She doesn't deny. She simply says she learned about it recently. That answer lands hard, because viewers who remember past intelligence failures, surveillance scandals, and institutional breakdowns know what that usually means. Either the system failed at a fundamental level, or critical information is being tightly controlled. And either possibility should concern anyone paying attention. Kennedy understands the weight of that moment. He warns her that this issue won't disappear quietly. If telecom companies feel legally exposed, if federal agents realize they followed questionable directives, if a special counsel operated without proper oversight, the consequences will be serious. He's signaling something very clear. This story isn't finished. There are still hidden corners, unanswered questions, and unresolved accountability. And everyone in the room, including Bondi, understands exactly what he's implying. Transparency is coming. Either by choice or by force, then Kennedy makes an abrupt pivot. The turn is so sharp it catches the room off guard. He moves away from surveillance and oversight and into something far darker, something that has hovered over American politics for more than a decade, the Epstein network. The atmosphere instantly changes. The tension deepens, because when Kennedy references Howard Lutnick's interview describing Epstein as the greatest blackmailer ever, the hearing is no longer just about subpoenas or legal authority. It's about whether one of the most disturbing criminal networks in modern history was fully investigated at all. Kennedy recounts Lutnick's claims. The massages, the private rooms, the suggestion of hidden recordings, the idea that powerful people didn't just witness wrongdoing but became trapped by it. And in that moment, the room understands something critical. This isn't just about what the government did. What it may have chosen not to do. These claims aren't new. They've circulated for years. But hearing them spoken out loud during a Senate hearing, officially entered into the public record, changes everything. Kennedy isn't validating the accusations. He's doing something more basic. He's asking the obvious question: if someone openly states that Jeffrey Epstein built power through blackmail, how has that person never been formally interviewed by investigators? Bondi's answer is blunt. She hasn't spoken to him. There are no plans to do so unless he reaches out first, and that's the moment when viewers at home shake their heads. Because for a long time now, many Americans have felt this case follows different rules when it intersects with powerful people. Investigations slow down. Key figures aren't questioned. Leads that would normally be chased aggressively in other cases seem to fade away without explanation. Kennedy taps directly into that frustration, whether by design or instinct. He understands that millions of people believe accountability becomes optional when wealth, status, or political influence enters the picture. He's careful not to accuse anyone outright. He doesn't make sweeping claims. He doesn't declare conclusions. But he doesn't need to. Simply asking why investigators haven't spoken to someone who publicly described Epstein as a blackmailer of powerful men is enough to reopen old doubts. It forces a deeper question. Is the system structured to avoid answers when those answers might be inconvenient? As Kennedy connects the dots, government surveillance, weak oversight, unpursued Epstein allegations, a troubling picture begins to form. One that suggests things are not working the way Americans expect. Not politically, not legally, not ethically, and viewers who have lived through decades of scandals recognize this pattern immediately. It's the familiar gray space where responsibility disappears, where institutions deflect, where trust quietly erodes over time. What this hearing revealed wasn't just a single subpoena or one questionable decision. It exposed the gap between what the system claims to be and how it actually operates. Kennedy's questions cut past polished legal language and placed Bondi in the space between procedure and public expectation. And in that silence, people watching heard something louder than testimony itself. They heard a reminder that transparency doesn't arrive on its own. It has to be demanded. It has to be pulled into the open by people willing to ask uncomfortable questions. When the hearing ended, nothing was resolved. No new files were released. No explanations were fully given. But something shifted. The public now knows that phone records belonging to 8 sitting U.S. senators were obtained under sealed authority. They know telecom companies may not have challenged those actions when they could have. They know top officials say they found out late. And they know that someone with direct proximity to Epstein's world made explosive claims that investigators still haven't followed up on. So the real story moves. Beyond the hearing itself. It becomes the story that continues after the cameras shut off. The one people keep watching long after the gavel falls. Because whether the issue is government surveillance or the unanswered questions surrounding the Epstein network, Americans are no longer satisfied with partial explanations. They want transparency. They want accountability. They want to know who approved what, who stayed silent, and who benefited, and that's where this video leaves you, with one simple question that may define what comes next. If sunlight is the best disinfectant, why do the most powerful institutions keep trying to dim the lights? If you want more clear, no-nonsense breakdowns like this, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There's more unfolding, and you won't want to miss what happens next.